The sound of splintering wood echoed across the cotton fields of Riverside Plantation in South Carolina on a hot July afternoon in 1869. Enslaved workers looked up from their labor, hearts sinking as they recognized that sound. The sound of something precious being destroyed, the sound that usually preceded violence and suffering. 10-year-old Isaac stood frozen in the doorway of the plantation's equipment shed, tears streaming down his face, watching as Master Robert Thornton smashed Isaac's homemade violin against a wooden post. The instrument, painstakingly carved over months from scrap wood, strung with horsehair, shaped with stolen tools and infinite patience, splintered into pieces. "I told you," Thornton said coldly, raising the violin's remains for another strike, "that slaves don't make music. Slaves work. This," he smashed it again, "is a distraction. This is disobedience. This is you forgetting your place." Isaac couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only watch as months of secret work, countless hours of careful craftsmanship, his one source of joy and escape, was systematically destroyed. But Isaac's grandmother, Ida, a woman of 65 who'd survived slavery her entire life and had learned when to stay silent and when to speak, couldn't hold back. "That boy has a gift," Ida said quietly but clearly. "A gift from God, and you're destroying it out of meanness, not necessity." Thornton wheeled on her, his face purpling with rage. "You dare to question me, to tell me what I should or shouldn't do with my property?" "Isaac ain't property anymore," Ida said, standing her ground despite the danger. "It's 1869, Master Thornton. The war ended 4 years ago. We're free people now. You can't own us no more." It was true, though the reality of freedom in South Carolina in 1869 was complicated and often hollow. The 13th Amendment had abolished slavery in 1865, but in practice, many formerly enslaved people remained on the same plantations where they'd been enslaved, now working as sharecroppers or tenant farmers under conditions that differed little from slavery. The Thornton plantation operated under this system. The formerly enslaved people were technically free, but remained on the land through debt peonage. They owed money to Thornton for housing, food, and supplies, money they could never fully repay through their agricultural labor. They couldn't leave until their debts were paid, and the debts never decreased. It was slavery in all but name. "Free," Thornton said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're free to leave any time you want, but you owe me $300 for housing, food, and supplies over the past 4 years. Pay that debt and you can walk off this land. Until then, you follow my rules. And my rules say no music, no distractions, no slaves, excuse me, workers wasting time on foolishness like this." He threw the broken violin pieces at Isaac's feet. "Get back to work, all of you, and if I catch anyone making music again, the consequences will be severe." Thornton stalked away, leaving Isaac kneeling in the dirt, gathering the splintered pieces of his violin, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ida knelt beside her grandson, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." "Why?" Isaac whispered. "Why does he hate it so much? The music wasn't hurting anyone. I only played after work when I'd finished all my tasks. Why can't I have this one thing?" "Because music makes you human," Ida said quietly. "It reminds you that you're more than a worker, more than someone defined by labor. And men like Thornton, they need us to forget we're human. They need us to think we're only valuable for what we can produce for them. Your music threatened that. Your music reminded everyone, including you, that you have worth beyond your work." Isaac looked at the broken pieces in his hands. Months of careful work destroyed in minutes. His one escape from the endless cycle of labor and poverty shattered. "I can't make another one," Isaac said. "It took me so long and I used all the scrap wood I could find. I can't." "Hush now," Ida said, though her own voice was breaking. "You'll find another way. You've got music in your soul, Isaac. Nobody can break that, not even Master Thornton with all his cruelty." But as Ida held her weeping grandson, she wondered if she was telling the truth. How many times could a person be broken before something inside them shattered beyond repair? How many times could hope be destroyed before it stopped growing back? The other workers on the plantation, about 30 families, nearly 150 people total, had witnessed the destruction of Isaac's violin. They'd heard Thornton's threats. And that night, after the day's work was done, they gathered in the small church building they'd constructed on the edge of the property. The church was their one space where Thornton couldn't easily control them. It was technically on his own. But the presence of traveling ministers and the protection of religious freedom made even Thornton reluctant to interfere too directly with church activities. Tonight, the gathering wasn't for worship. It was for community discussion about what had happened to Isaac. "That boy has more talent than anyone I've ever seen," said James, a man of 40 who'd been a field hand his entire life. "I've heard trained musicians in Charleston before the war. Isaac plays better than most of them, and he taught himself on a homemade instrument. That's extraordinary." "Which is exactly why Thornton destroyed it," said Sarah, a woman of 35 who'd been a house servant before the war. "He can't stand seeing a black child excel at something. Can't stand the reminder that we're capable of more than the labor he demands from us." "What can we do?" asked another voice. "Thornton owns the land. We're all in debt to him. We have no power here." "We have more power than we think," said a new voice from the back of the church. Everyone turned to see who'd spoken. It was a man they didn't immediately recognize, a black man in his 50s, well-dressed, carrying himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. "Who are you?" James asked warily. Strangers could be dangerous. They might be informers or troublemakers who'd bring Thornton's wrath down on the community. "My name is William Hayes," the man said, moving forward into the lamplight. "I'm a teacher from the Freedmen's Bureau. I've been traveling throughout South Carolina, establishing schools for formerly enslaved people and their children. I was passing through and heard about the incident this afternoon. I came to see if I could help." The Freedmen's Bureau was a federal agency established in 1865 to aid formerly enslaved people in their transition to freedom. The Bureau established schools, negotiated labor contracts, and attempted to protect freed people's rights. Though by 1869, the Bureau's power and funding were declining as Northern interest in Reconstruction waned. "How can you help?" Ida asked skeptically. "Thornton destroyed my grandson's violin. He threatened all of us. What can a teacher do about that?" "Perhaps more than you think," William said. "I've heard Isaac play. I was in the area yesterday and heard music coming from this plantation. I stopped to listen and I was astonished. That boy has a gift, a genuine, exceptional gift. And Mrs. Ida, gifts like that shouldn't be wasted or destroyed. They should be nurtured." "Beautiful words," Sarah said bitterly. "But they don't change reality. Thornton controls this land and our lives. We can't nurture anything when we're working dawn to dusk just to survive." "What if Isaac didn't have to stay here?" William asked. "What if he could go somewhere he'd be free to develop his talent? I work with several organizations in the North that provide scholarships for exceptional students. If Isaac's as talented as I heard yesterday, I believe I could arrange for him to attend a music conservatory in Boston. All expenses paid, housing included, education provided by the finest music teachers in America." The church fell silent. The idea seemed impossible. A 10-year-old black boy from a South Carolina plantation attending a prestigious Northern music school. It was the kind of dream that seemed too large to even imagine. "Isaac can't leave," Ida said, though her voice trembled with hope and fear. "He's in debt to Thornton, same as all of us. Thornton would never let him go." "Actually," William said, pulling papers from his bag, "children under 12 can't legally incur debt under federal law. Isaac's debt to Thornton is void. Thornton has no legal claim on him." "Thornton doesn't care about legal claims," James pointed out. "He'll use violence or threats to keep Isaac here. We've all seen what happens to people who try to leave." "Which is why we'd need to be strategic," William said. "But my friends, I've helped dozens of families navigate these situations. There are ways. Legal protections that still exist, federal authorities who can be called upon, networks that can ensure safe passage to the North. It's not easy, but it's possible." "Why do you care?" Ida asked directly. "You don't know us, you don't know Isaac. Why would you risk so much for a boy you heard play for a few minutes?" William was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because 20 years ago, I was enslaved on a plantation in Virginia. I had a gift, too, for mathematics and engineering. And my master destroyed my books and my instruments the way Thornton destroyed Isaac's violin. He couldn't stand seeing a slave who could calculate and design better than he could. I eventually escaped to the North. I was educated, became a teacher, and devoted my life to making sure other talented people don't have their gifts destroyed the way mine almost was. Isaac has something special. The world deserves to hear his music, and he deserves the chance to develop his gift without being crushed by men who fear black excellence." The community discussed late into the night. The idea of sending Isaac to Boston was thrilling and terrifying. If it succeeded, one of their own would escape the trap of debt peonage and have opportunities they could barely imagine. But if it failed, Thornton's retaliation would be swift and terrible. Finally, Ida made a decision. "I'll talk to Isaac. If he wants to go, if he's brave enough to take this chance, then we'll help him, but the choice has to be his." The next morning, Ida spoke with Isaac in the small cabin they shared with 3 other families. She explained William's offer, the possibility of going to Boston, the risks and opportunities. Isaac listened, still clutching pieces of his broken violin. When Ida finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Will I ever come back?" Isaac asked finally. "If I go to Boston, will I see you again?" Ida felt tears burning her eyes. "I don't know, baby. I'm old. I might not live to see you come back. But Isaac, if you stay here, you'll spend your life working Thornton's land, owing him debts you can never repay, watching your gift die a little more each day. That's not the life I want for you." "What do you want for me?" Isaac asked. "I want you to be free," Ida said. "Really free. Free to make music, to develop your gift, to become everything you're capable of being. I want you to live the life I never could, to have opportunities I never dreamed of. Even if it means I never see you again, I want you to be free." Isaac looked at the broken violin pieces, then at his grandmother's face, then out the window at the fields where he'd labored since he was 6 years old. "I'll go," Isaac said quietly. "I'll go to Boston. I'll learn to play properly. And Grandma, I'll make music so beautiful that everyone who hears it will know that black people are capable of anything. I'll make you proud." "You already make me proud," Ida said, pulling him into her arms. "Every single day you make me proud." But making the decision to send Isaac to Boston was the easy part. Actually getting him there safely, without Thornton discovering the plan until it was too late, would require careful planning, courage, and more than a little luck. And everyone involved knew that if Thornton discovered what they were planning, the consequences would be devastating. William Hayes remained in the area for the next week, ostensibly conducting educational assessments for the Freedmen's Bureau. In reality, he was coordinating Isaac's escape with the community and with contacts in the North. The plan had to be executed carefully. Thornton monitored the formerly enslaved workers closely, tracking their movements and activities. Anyone leaving the plantation without permission faced harassment, violence, or threats of financial retaliation. Children were watched even more closely. Thornton knew that losing young workers meant losing future labor. "We need to give Thornton a reason to let Isaac leave the plantation temporarily," William explained during a secret meeting in the church. "Something legitimate that won't raise immediate suspicion." "A church event in Charleston," suggested Reverend Thomas, the traveling minister who visited the plantation monthly. "I'm organizing a regional gathering for young people from several communities. Religious education, Bible study, music for worship. Thornton has allowed young people to attend such events before because they don't want to appear anti-religious." "Perfect," William said. "We tell Thornton that Isaac is attending this church gathering in Charleston. It's only 30 miles away, so it seems reasonable. Reverend Thomas escorts Isaac to Charleston, supposedly for religious education. But once we're in Charleston, we put Isaac on a ship to Boston." "Thornton will realize Isaac's gone when he doesn't return from Charleston," James pointed out. "He'll come after him." "By the time Thornton realizes Isaac isn't coming back, the ship will already be at sea," William said. "And once Isaac reaches Boston, he'll be under federal protection in a northern state where South Carolina has no jurisdiction. Thornton can't force him back." "He can retaliate against those of us left here," Sarah said quietly. "That's what worries me. If Isaac escapes, Thornton will punish the rest of us." The group fell silent. This was the terrible calculus of resistance under oppression, the risk that individual acts of defiance would bring collective punishment. "Which is why we make it clear that Isaac's escape was organized by outsiders, by the Freedmen's Bureau and Northern abolitionists," William said. "I'll leave evidence showing my involvement. Letters, documents, proof that this was planned by federal agents, not by the community. Thornton's anger will be directed at institutions he can't easily attack rather than at individuals he can harm." "Will that actually protect us?" James asked skeptically. "It should reduce retaliation," William said. "But I won't lie to you, there are risks. Thornton is vindictive and cruel. He might punish you anyway, regardless of who was responsible. You all need to decide if sending Isaac to freedom is worth those risks." The community debated through the night. Some argued that protecting one child wasn't worth risking everyone's safety. Others contended that allowing Thornton to crush Isaac's gift without resistance meant accepting that none of them would ever be truly free. Finally, it was Ida who settled the question. "I've lived 65 years under slavery and pseudo-freedom. I've watched children sold away, families destroyed, gifts and talents crushed because white men feared black excellence. If we don't fight back now, when do we fight? If we don't protect this one child's gift, what are we preserving? I say we send Isaac to Boston, we accept the risks, and we trust that doing right matters more than staying safe." Her words carried weight. Ida was respected as an elder, a survivor, someone whose judgment had guided the community through countless crises. The group voted. Overwhelmingly, they decided to proceed with the plan. Over the next days, preparations were made quietly. Reverend Thomas officially announced the regional church gathering in Charleston, inviting young people to attend. Several families expressed interest, which made Isaac's participation seem unremarkable. William gathered the documentation Isaac would need: letters of recommendation, testimonials about his musical ability, applications to the New England Conservatory of Music, and most importantly, legal papers establishing Isaac's free status and invalidating any debt claims Thornton might make. And Isaac spent his evenings with his grandmother, memorizing everything she told him about their family history, about survival and resilience, about maintaining dignity in the face of oppression. "You'll be going to a world I can barely imagine," Ida told Isaac the night before his departure. "A world where you'll be educated by white teachers, where you'll live among white students, where you'll have opportunities I never dreamed of. But Isaac, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the people who made your freedom possible. Don't forget that your gift isn't just yours. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who's been told they're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable of excellence." "I won't forget," Isaac promised. "Grandma, I'll make music that tells our stories. I'll become so good that everyone has to recognize that black people are just as talented, just as intelligent, just as human as anyone else. I'll make them see us." "You already see yourself," Ida said, touching his face gently. "That's the most important thing. You know your worth. Don't let anyone take that from you, no matter how prestigious they are or how much they claim to know better." The morning of departure arrived. Isaac, along with 3 other young people from the community, traveled to Charleston with Reverend Thomas. To Thornton, it appeared to be a normal church outing, young people seeking religious education under the supervision of a minister. Thornton barely acknowledged their departure, waving them off with instructions to return in 3 days. He had no idea he'd never see Isaac again. In Charleston, Reverend Thomas took the group to the church where the regional gathering was supposedly taking place. 3 of the young people actually participated in the religious event. But Isaac, accompanied by William Hayes, quietly left the church and made his way to Charleston's harbor. A ship called the Northern Star was departing that afternoon for Boston. William had arranged passage for Isaac, along with detailed instructions for the captain about Isaac's situation and the importance of ensuring his safe arrival in Boston. At the harbor, William gave Isaac final instructions and documents. "When you arrive in Boston, a representative from the New England Conservatory will meet you. Her name is Mrs. Catherine Morrison. She's a white woman, a music teacher, and she's committed to helping talented students regardless of race. She'll handle your enrollment and ensure you have housing and everything you need." "What if something goes wrong?" Isaac asked, suddenly feeling the enormity of what he was doing. He was 10 years old, leaving everything he'd ever known, traveling alone to a distant city, trusting his future to strangers. "If anything goes wrong, you contact the Freedmen's Bureau office in Boston," William said, pressing a card into Isaac's hand. "The address is here. They'll help you. But Isaac, I don't think anything will go wrong. Mrs. Morrison is expecting you. The conservatory is excited to have you. You're going to be safe and supported." William knelt to Isaac's level. "You're extraordinarily brave. Most adults couldn't be." "Oh, what you're doing. Your grandmother is right to be proud of you." "Will Grandma be safe?" Isaac asked, the question he'd been afraid to voice. William hesitated before answering honestly. "I've done everything I can to protect your community. I've left evidence making clear that I organized your escape, that federal agents facilitated it, that the local community had no involvement. But Isaac, I can't guarantee Thornton won't retaliate. Your grandmother knows the risks. She decided they were worth it to give you this chance." Isaac felt tears burning his eyes. He was leaving his grandmother, possibly forever, and putting her at risk. The weight of that guilt felt unbearable. "Don't waste this opportunity feeling guilty," William said gently, seeing Isaac's distress. "The best way to honor your grandmother's sacrifice is to succeed, to develop your gift, to become the musician she believes you can be, to prove that her faith in you was justified. That's how you repay her." The ship's departure horn sounded. It was time to board. Isaac embraced William, then walked up the gangplank with his small bag of belongings. He turned at the top to wave, and William waved back, watching as the boy disappeared onto the ship. As the Northern Star pulled away from the dock, Isaac stood at the rail, watching Charleston recede into the distance. He was leaving behind everything familiar: his grandmother, his community, the only home he'd ever known. But he was also sailing toward something unprecedented: freedom, education, opportunity. A chance to become more than what Thornton had tried to make him. Isaac reached into his bag and pulled out the one thing he'd brought from home besides clothing: a small piece of his broken violin, a fragment of the bridge that had miraculously survived Thornton's destruction. He held it tightly, a reminder of what had been destroyed and what he was fighting to rebuild. "I'll make you proud, Grandma," Isaac whispered toward the receding shore. "I promise." Back at Riverside Plantation, 3 days passed. The 3 young people who'd actually attended the church gathering returned on schedule, but Isaac didn't. When Thornton realized Isaac was missing, his rage was explosive. "Where is the boy?" Thornton demanded, confronting Reverend Thomas. "I don't know," Reverend Thomas said truthfully. "He was supposed to be at the church gathering, but I lost track of him in Charleston. Perhaps he ran away." Thornton immediately suspected the community had helped Isaac escape. He stormed through the workers' cabins, demanding answers, threatening violence. But every person he confronted told the same story. They knew nothing about Isaac's disappearance. The boy had gone to Charleston for religious education. What happened after that, they couldn't say. When Thornton confronted Ida, she met his rage with calm dignity. "My grandson is gone. That's all I know. Perhaps he decided he didn't want to spend his life working off debts to a man who destroys beautiful things out of meanness. Perhaps he wanted a different life." "He owes me money," Thornton said. "Years of housing, food, supplies. He can't just leave without paying his debts." "Isaac is 10 years old," Ida replied. "Children can't legally incur debt under federal law. You have no claim on him." Thornton looked like he wanted to strike her, but even in his rage, he knew that violence against an elderly woman would bring federal attention he didn't want. Instead, he searched the community for evidence of conspiracy. What he found was a letter, left conspicuously in the church, signed by William Hayes. The letter explained that the Freedmen's Bureau had identified Isaac as an exceptionally talented student who deserved educational opportunities. The Bureau had arranged Isaac's transport to Boston and his enrollment in a music conservatory. The decision had been made by federal agents, and the local community had no knowledge of the plan until after Isaac had departed. It was a lie, of course. The community had been fully involved. But the letter provided plausible deniability and directed Thornton's anger away from people he could easily hurt. Thornton was furious, but also frustrated. The Freedmen's Bureau was a federal agency. Even in 1869, with Reconstruction winding down, attacking federal agents directly was risky. And Isaac was already gone, probably already in Boston, where South Carolina law couldn't reach him. Thornton could make Isaac's life difficult by contacting authorities in Boston and claiming the boy was a runaway who owed money. But the documentation William had left made clear that Isaac was free and owed no legal debts. There was nothing Thornton could do except that he'd lost a worker and seethe with humiliation and rage. He did retaliate against the community in petty ways, reducing rations, increasing work requirements, creating new rules designed to make life harder. But he stopped short of violent retribution everyone had feared, perhaps recognizing that such actions would draw federal attention. Ida endured the retaliation with quiet strength. She'd sacrificed comfort and safety to give her grandson a chance at a better life. It was worth every hardship. And then, 2 months after Isaac's departure, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, addressed to Ida. It had been sent from Boston and had traveled through several hands before reaching Riverside Plantation. Ida couldn't read. She'd never been taught, so she brought the letter to Sarah, who could, and Sarah read it aloud to the assembled community in the church. Dear Grandma Asterisk, I arrived safely in Boston. Mrs. Morrison met me at the harbor, just like Mr. Hayes said she would. She took me to the conservatory and helped me settle into housing with other students. Grandma, I can't describe how beautiful this place is. The conservatory has instruments I've never seen, teachers who have played for presidents and kings, and students from all over the world. When I told them I'd learned to play on a homemade violin, they were amazed. Mrs. Morrison gave me a real violin, a beautiful instrument made by a famous craftsman. When I first played it, I cried. It sounds like nothing I'd ever imagined. I played the songs you taught me, and Mrs. Morrison said I have extraordinary natural talent that simply needs refinement. I'm studying every day. Music theory, technique, composition, performance. It's hard work, but Grandma, I love it. I love learning, love improving, love discovering what I'm capable of. Some of the white students aren't kind. They say terrible things about black people, doubt that I belong here, act like I'm inferior. But I'm proving them wrong every single day. Yesterday, I performed a piece in class that made my teacher cry. She said it was the most emotionally powerful performance she'd heard in 30 years of teaching. I miss you every day. I miss everyone on the plantation. But I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm developing my gift. I'm honoring the sacrifices you made, and I'm proving that we're capable of anything. I'm going to make you proud, I promise. All my love. Isaac. As Sarah finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The community had taken an enormous risk sending Isaac away, had endured retaliation and hardship, had sacrificed one of their children to an uncertain future. But the letter proved it had been worth it. Isaac was safe. He was thriving. He was becoming the musician they'd all believed he could be. He's doing it, Ida said, tears streaming down her face. He's actually doing it. That boy's proving that we're so much more than what they try to make us. But Isaac's story was far from over. And what happened 2 years later in 1871 would shock everyone who'd known him and force South Carolina society to confront uncomfortable truths about race, talent, and the lies they'd been telling themselves about black capability. In July 1871, exactly 2 years after Robert Thornton had destroyed Isaac's violin, a notice appeared in the Charleston Mercury newspaper. The New England Conservatory of Music presents Isaac Washington, Violin Prodigy, a special performance at Charleston Music Hall. Mr. Washington, age 12, will perform selections from Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach, as well as original compositions. This event showcases the exceptional talent of a young musician whose story represents the possibilities of education and dedication. Sunday, July 30th, 1871 at 7:00 p.m. All are welcome. The notice was paid for by the Freedmen's Bureau and several Northern abolitionist organizations. They'd planned Isaac's Charleston performance very deliberately. This wasn't just a concert. It was a political statement, a demonstration that black talent and intelligence were equal to any white persons when given proper opportunities and education. Word of the concert spread rapidly through South Carolina's black communities. A 12-year-old black boy who'd escaped from Thornton's plantation was returning as an accomplished musician, trained by prestigious teachers, performing classical music at a venue that normally excluded black people as audience members, let alone performers. It was unprecedented, it was provocative, and it was designed to challenge every assumption white South Carolinians held about black capability. Ida, now 67 and increasingly frail, received a personal invitation to attend Isaac's concert. The invitation came with travel arrangements, transportation from Riverside Plantation to Charleston, lodging, and most importantly, a legal order from federal authorities stating that Ida was required to attend the concert as a witness for Freedmen's Bureau documentation purposes. The legal order was a fiction. The Freedmen's Bureau had no actual need for Ida's testimony, but it provided protection, making clear that anyone who interfered with Ida's travel would be obstructing federal operations. Robert Thornton was furious when he received notice that Ida would be traveling to Charleston. But faced with a federal order, he had little choice but to comply. "This is absurd," Thornton fumed. "That boy ran away 2 years ago. He has no right to return here, parading himself like he's accomplished something, making a mockery of the natural order. The natural order you're referring to doesn't legally exist anymore, the federal marshal delivering the notice said calmly. Slavery was abolished. Isaac Washington is a free citizen with every right to travel and perform, and Mrs. Ida is required for official documentation. She'll be leaving for Charleston tomorrow under federal protection. Thornton wanted to argue, wanted to prevent Ida's departure, wanted to maintain his control. But he recognized he'd lost this battle. Isaac had escaped his power, had succeeded beyond anything Thornton had imagined possible, and now was returning to publicly demonstrate that everything Thornton believed about black inferiority was a lie. The next day, Ida made the 30-mile journey to Charleston, accompanied by a federal marshal and several members of the Riverside plantation community who'd been given passes to attend the concert. They arrived in a city buzzing with anticipation and controversy about Isaac's performance. White Charleston society was divided. Some refused to attend, declaring it inappropriate for a black child to perform at Charleston Music Hall. Others were curious, wanting to see if the rumors about Isaac's talent were true. Still others came specifically to find fault, to prove that black musicians couldn't achieve real excellence. But black communities throughout the region were unequivocal. They were celebrating Isaac as a symbol of possibility, a demonstration that education and opportunity could produce excellence regardless of race. Charleston Music Hall was packed on the night of July 30th. The audience was unusually mixed, black and white, rich and poor, supporters and skeptics. Federal marshals were present to prevent disturbances, a reminder of the political tension underlying the performance. Backstage, Isaac prepared with Mrs. Catherine Morrison, his teacher from the conservatory who traveled with him to Charleston. "How do you feel?" Mrs. Morrison asked. Terrified, Isaac admitted. He was 12 years old, about to perform before hundreds of people, many of whom wanted him to fail. "What if I make mistakes? What if I'm not good enough?" "Isaac, you're extraordinary," Mrs. Morrison said firmly. "I've taught for 35 years. I've worked with students who have performed for royalty. You're as talented as any of them, more talented than most. But more than that, you play with soul and emotion that can't be taught. You make people feel something when you play. That's a gift few musicians ever achieve." "But they're going to judge me differently," Isaac said. "Because I'm black. If I make the slightest mistake, they'll say it proves black people can't achieve excellence in classical music." "That's true," Mrs. Morrison acknowledged. "You're carrying a burden that white musicians don't carry. It's unfair. But Isaac, you've already proven yourself. You've mastered in 2 years what takes most students 5 years to learn. You've composed original works that professional musicians praise. You don't have to prove anything to anyone except yourself." A knock on the door interrupted them. "It's time," someone said. Isaac took a deep breath, picked up his violin, the beautiful instrument Mrs. Morrison had given him 2 years ago, and walked toward the stage. In the audience, Ida sat in a special section reserved for Isaac's family and community members from Riverside. Her hands trembled with anticipation. She hadn't seen her grandson in 2 years. She'd received letters, knew he was succeeding, but seeing him perform, seeing what he'd become, would make everything real. The lights dimmed, the audience quieted. Isaac walked onto the stage. He looked different than Ida remembered. He'd grown taller, his posture more confident. He wore formal concert attire, a black suit that made him look older, more professional. But his face was still the same sweet, intelligent face she'd known since he was born. Isaac bowed to the audience, positioned his violin, and prepared to play. The piece he'd chosen to open with was Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 3, a technically demanding work that showcased both skill and emotional expression. Isaac drew his bow across the strings. The first notes filled the hall, pure, clear, perfectly controlled. Isaac's fingers moved across the instrument with precision and confidence, producing sounds that ranged from delicate whispers to powerful declarations. But it was more than technical skill. Isaac played with an emotional depth that transformed the familiar Mozart concerto into something persona. And profound. He played like he was telling a story, about struggle, about hope, about the journey from a South Carolina plantation to a Boston concert stage, about a grandmother's sacrifice and a community's courage. The audience sat transfixed. Even those who'd come prepared to criticize found themselves unable to focus on anything except the music pouring from this 12-year-old boy's violin. Ida wept openly, overwhelmed by pride and joy and grief for all the years they'd lost. Isaac finished the Mozart piece to thunderous applause. Then he performed Beethoven, then Bach, each performance technically flawless and emotionally powerful. For his final piece, Isaac had prepared something special, an original composition he'd titled Grandma's Song. He'd announced it would be dedicated to Ida Washington, whose courage and sacrifice made this concert possible. The piece began softly, almost hesitantly, gentle notes that suggested morning light, the start of a difficult day. Then it built gradually, incorporating rhythms and melodies Isaac had learned from the spirituals and work songs his grandmother and community had sung. It was technically classical music, but infused with black musical traditions, creating something that honored both his training and his heritage. The piece told a story without words, about labor and suffering, about hope despite oppression, about love strong enough to sacrifice everything. It was joyful and sorrowful, mournful and triumphant, capturing the complexity of black life in America with stunning emotional honesty. As Isaac played, something remarkable happened. The rigid social divisions in the audience began to dissolve. White listeners who'd come prepared to dismiss a black performer found themselves moved to tears. Black audience members who'd experienced the same struggles Isaac's music evoked felt seen and validated. The music transcended the prejudices and divisions people had brought with them. When Isaac finished, the hall erupted. People stood applauding until their hands hurt. Some were weeping. Others were shouting praise. The ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Isaac bowed, then looked directly at where his grandmother sat. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. He raised his violin toward her in tribute, and she raised her hand in blessing, tears streaming down her face. It was a moment of perfect communication, grandmother and grandson, separated by years and miles but connected by love and shared victory. Everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd risked, everything they'd endured, it had all been worth it for this moment. After the performance, Isaac was surrounded by well-wishers backstage. Music critics wanted interviews. Wealthy patrons offered commissions. Northern newspapers requested statements for articles about his unprecedented achievement. But Isaac pushed through the crowd to find his grandmother. When he saw Ida, he ran to her, still just a child despite his sophisticated performance. She embraced him, holding him like she'd never let go. "You did it, baby," Ida whispered. "You made music so beautiful that everyone had to see you, really see you, not as what they think black people are, but as the extraordinary person you actually are." "It's because of you," Isaac said. "Everything I did on that stage, it's because you believed in me enough to let me go, to risk everything so I could have this chance. Grandma, I'm here because you were brave." They held each other while the backstage chaos continued around them. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the crowd, not the acclaim, not even the political significance of what Isaac had accomplished. What mattered was the bond between grandmother and grandson, a bond that had survived separation and sacrifice and had produced something beautiful. But the evening wasn't over, because in the crowd backstage, pushing through with barely contained fury, was Robert Thornton. He'd attended the concert reluctantly, drawn by curiosity and by the inability to resist seeing what the boy he'd tried to crush had become. He'd sat through the performance with growing discomfort, recognizing that Isaac's talent and accomplishment directly challenged everything Thornton believed about black inferiority. And now, seeing Isaac celebrated and praised, seeing Ida's triumph in her grandson's success, Thornton felt something snap inside him. "This is unnatural," Thornton announced loudly, his voice cutting through the backstage conversations. "A Negro performing at Charleston Music Hall, playing white man's music, being celebrated like he's accomplished something remarkable. It's an insult to the natural order, a mockery of true civilization." The backstage area fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Thornton. Isaac stepped forward, positioning himself between Thornton and his grandmother. Despite being only 12 years old, despite Thornton being the man who destroyed his first violin and 3. Aunt and his family, Isaac faced him without visible fear. "The music I played tonight isn't white man's music," Isaac said clearly. "It's human music. Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, they were human beings expressing human emotions through sound. That's something anyone can do, regardless of race. My skin color doesn't limit what music I can learn or perform or create. You're mimicking civilization, Thornton said dismissively. Aping behaviors you don't truly understand. Real musical genius requires breeding, refinement, cultural heritage, things your race doesn't possess. I composed the final piece you heard tonight, Isaac said. I created it from nothing, using techniques I learned and emotions I felt. If that's not real musical genius, I don't know what is. And Mr. Thornton, everyone in this hall tonight, including you, was moved by that music. You can deny it, but I saw you during the performance. The music reached you despite your prejudices. Mrs. Morrison stepped forward, standing beside Isaac. Mr. Thornton, I've taught music for 35 years at one of America's most prestigious conservatories. I've worked with students from the wealthiest, most refined families in the nation. Isaac is among the most talented musicians I've ever taught. His success isn't mimicry or accident. It's genuine excellence achieved through dedication and natural ability. You're being deceived by your abolitionist sympathies, Thornton said to Mrs. Morrison. You want to believe this boy is exceptional, so you've convinced yourself he is. I'm a professional musician and teacher, Mrs. Morrison replied coldly. I evaluate talent objectively, and I'm telling you that Isaac's abilities are extraordinary by any standard. Your refusal to acknowledge that says more about your limitations than his. The confrontation had drawn a crowd. Journalists were scribbling notes. Federal marshals had positioned themselves nearby, ready to intervene if Thornton's verbal aggression escalated to violence. William Hayes, the Freedmen's Bureau teacher who'd arranged Isaac's escape 2 years earlier, stepped into the tension. Mr. Thornton, you destroyed Isaac's homemade violin because you couldn't tolerate seeing a black child create something beautiful. Tonight, Isaac played a professional instrument worth more than most people earn in a year, performed music that moved hundreds of people, and demonstrated that everything you believe about black inferiority is a lie. The question now is, will you learn from being proven wrong? Will you recognize that black people, when given education and opportunity, are capable of the same excellence as white people? Or will you cling to prejudices even when confronted with undeniable evidence that they're false? Thornton looked around at the assembled crowd, musicians praising Isaac, critics calling him a prodigy, audiences who'd been moved to tears by his performance. The evidence of Isaac's talent and accomplishment was overwhelming and undeniable. But admitting he'd been wrong about black capability would require Thornton to question everything he'd built his life around. It would mean acknowledging that the system of racial hierarchy he'd benefited from was unjust and false. Thornton couldn't do it. Instead, he turned and pushed through the crowd, leaving without another word. His departure felt like a victory and a warning. Victory because Isaac and his supporters had confronted Thornton's racism and forced him to retreat. Warning because Thornton's inability to accept the truth suggested how deeply entrenched racial prejudice was, how resistant to change even when presented with undeniable proof. But in that moment, Isaac and his community chose to focus on victory rather than warning. They celebrated late into the night, sharing stories, making music, honoring Ida's courage and Isaac's achievement. You know what the most important part of tonight was? Ida said to Isaac as the celebration wound down. It wasn't just that you played beautifully or that white people had to acknowledge your talent. It was that you made music that told our story. That final piece, Grandma's song, it carried the truth of our lives, our struggles, our resilience. You took classical training and used it to honor us, to make our experiences visible and valid. That's what I want to do with my music, Isaac said. I want to master the technical skills so well that no one can dismiss me, and then use those skills to tell stories that matter, to honor the people who made my success possible, to prove that black experiences and black artistry deserve respect and attention. You're already doing it, Ida said, and baby, I'm so proud I could burst. Isaac's performance in Charleston generated national attention. Northern newspapers published glowing reviews, describing him as a musical prodigy whose talent transcends racial boundaries, and proof that education and opportunity, not race, determine human achievement. Southern newspapers were more divided. Some acknowledged Isaac's talent while carefully noting it as an exception rather than evidence of broader black capability. Others dismissed the entire event as abolitionist propaganda designed to promote false racial equality. But regardless of how newspapers framed it, Isaac's performance had accomplished something important. It had forced a conversation about black capability and potential that South Carolina society had been avoiding. Over the next years, Isaac continued his education at the New England Conservatory. He performed throughout the North, giving concerts that challenged audiences to confront their prejudices. He composed original works that blended classical techniques with black musical traditions, creating a distinctive style that influenced later composers. He also became an advocate for educational opportunities for black children. He spoke at schools and churches, raising funds for education programs, and arguing passionately that talent was distributed equally across races, but opportunity was not. "I'm not exceptional because I'm somehow different from other black children," Isaac would tell audiences. "I'm exceptional because I received opportunities most black children never get." How many other Isaacs are working in fields or factories right now, their talents undeveloped and unrecognized because no one invested in their education? How many gifts are being wasted because we've decided that black children don't deserve the same opportunities as white children? In 1875, when Isaac was 16, he published a memoir titled From Broken Violin to Concert Hall, a story of talent, sacrifice, and the fight for dignity. The book became a bestseller and was used by abolitionists and civil rights advocates as evidence for the importance of education and equal opportunity. The memoir's most powerful chapter described the day Thornton destroyed Isaac's violin, the moment that had set everything else in motion. "When Master Thornton smashed my homemade violin," Isaac wrote, "he thought he was destroying a distraction, crushing a slave who was getting above himself. But he was actually revealing the truth about slavery and racial oppression. They're not just systems that exploit labor, they're systems that must destroy excellence and potential to maintain themselves." If enslaved people were allowed to develop their talents, if black children were educated and given opportunities, the lie of black inferiority would be exposed. So oppressors must prevent that development, must crush those talents, must make sure that evidence of black capability never emerges. My grandmother understood this. That's why she risked everything to send me north, to give me chances she'd never had. She knew that my success wouldn't just benefit me, it would challenge the entire system of ideas that had oppressed her all her life. Ida lived to see Isaac's memoir published. She died in 1876 at age 70, surrounded by community members who honored her as the woman whose courage had made Isaac's success possible. Isaac returned to South Carolina for her funeral, performing Grandma's song at the service. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. "She gave me everything," Isaac said in his eulogy. "Her courage, her faith, her willingness to sacrifice her own comfort for my future. Every note I play, every concert I perform, every composition I create, it's all because a woman who couldn't read, who'd been enslaved her entire life, who had every reason to give up hope, decided that one black child deserved a chance at excellence. That's the greatest legacy anyone could leave." Isaac continued performing and composing for decades. He became one of the most respected musicians of his generation, regardless of race. He taught at several prestigious conservatories, trained numerous students, and used his platform to advocate for racial justice and educational equality. In 1895, Isaac was invited to perform at Carnegie Hall in New York City, one of the first black musicians to headline at the prestigious venue. For that concert, he chose to perform the same pieces he'd played in Charleston 24 years earlier, including Grandma's Song. "These pieces represent a journey," Isaac told the Carnegie Hall audience before performing. "From a South Carolina plantation where a cruel man destroyed my homemade violin to a concert hall where I'm honored to perform for you tonight. But more than that, they represent the journey of my people, from slavery to freedom, from oppression to opportunity, from being told we're inferior to proving we're equal. My grandmother used to say that music makes us human. That's why oppressors fear it, because it reminds us of our dignity and worth beyond our labor. Tonight I play for everyone who's been told they're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable of excellence. You are capable, you are worthy, and your gifts deserve to be developed and celebrated." The Carnegie Hall performance was a triumph. But for Isaac, the most meaningful concert of his career remained that 1871 performance in Charleston, the concert where he'd returned to the city he'd fled 2 years earlier and proved that everything Thornton had tried to destroy had actually flourished. Robert Thornton never acknowledged Isaac's success. He died in 1887, still defending slavery and racial hierarchy, still insisting that black people were inherently inferior despite mountains of evidence to the contrary. But Thornton's rigidity didn't matter, because by the time he died, Isaac had already proven him wrong in ways that couldn't be denied. Isaac had become a renowned musician, celebrated teacher, and influential composer. Everything Thornton had insisted was impossible for a black person. Isaac Washington died in 1934 at age 75, having lived through slavery's end, Reconstruction, Jim Crow's establishment, and the early civil rights movement. His obituary appeared in newspapers across the nation, describing him as a pioneering musician whose talent and advocacy challenged racial barriers and inspired generations. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the New England Conservatory of Music, where Isaac had studied and later taught. The conservatory established the Isaac Washington Scholarship for talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds, regardless of race. The scholarship's announcement explained, Isaac Washington succeeded not because he was exceptionally talented, though he was, but because someone believed in him enough to sacrifice everything for his opportunity. This scholarship honors that belief by ensuring other talented young people receive chances they might not otherwise have. Decades after Isaac's death, music historians and civil rights scholars continued studying his life and work. They analyzed how his compositions had blended classical and black musical traditions, creating something new and distinctive. They examined how his advocacy had influenced discussions about education and opportunity. They documented how his success had challenged racial assumptions and inspired other black musicians to pursue classical music despite discrimination. But for those who'd known Isaac personally, who'd heard his music and understood his journey, the most important part of his legacy wasn't his technical achievement or his advocacy. It was what he represented. He represented courage in the face of oppression. He represented the power of one person believing in a child's potential. He represented what becomes possible when talent meets opportunity. He represented the truth that human capability isn't limited by race, but by the opportunities society provides. And he represented the answer to the question that had driven his grandmother's sacrifice. What happens when you give a talented black child the same opportunities that white children receive? What happens is extraordinary. What happens is excellence. What happens is proof that everything the oppressors claimed about black inferiority was a lie. The master had destroyed the young black boy's violin in 1869, thinking he was crushing a distraction and putting a slave in his place. 2 hours later, everyone was shocked when they learned what would happen next. But the real shock wasn't what happened immediately. It was what happened over the next 65 years, as that boy became a renowned musician who proved that black talent, when nurtured rather than crushed, could achieve anything. Robert Thornton had tried to destroy Isaac's gift. Instead, he'd created a story that would be told for generations. A story about how one act of cruelty had accidentally triggered an extraordinary journey from plantation to concert hall, from broken homemade violin to Carnegie Hall performances, from enslaved child to celebrated musician. It was a story about the power of talent and determination. But more than that, it was a story about the power of belief, about a grandmother who believed enough to sacrifice everything, about teachers who believed enough to invest in a black student's potential, about a community that believed enough to risk retaliation, and about a boy who believed in himself enough to keep making music no matter what obstacles he faced. And that belief, that fundamental conviction that black people were capable of excellence, that racial oppression was wrong, that talent deserved to be nurtured regardless of race, that belief ultimately mattered more than all the violins destroyed, all the obstacles placed, all the prejudices insisted upon. Because belief creates possibility, and possibility, when combined with courage and opportunity, creates change. That was Isaac Washington's true legacy, not just the beautiful music he made, but the proof he provided that a different world, a more just world, a world that recognized and celebrated black excellence, was possible. All because a grandmother was brave enough to let her grandson go, a boy was courageous enough to pursue his gift, and a community was strong enough to support both their dreams even when the cost seemed unbearable. The master destroyed the violin, but the music lived on.